Hello, welcome back to the studio. And something, well, very in keeping for this time of year. It's Halloween weekend 2023. Now, this painting really didn't happen. I wasn't very well at the beginning of the week, and your lovely well-wishings got me through it, and I feel much better. Another little celebration is the little YouTube channel passed 5,000 subscribers, and it's all down to you lovely people for tuning in, watching, subscribing, leaving lovely comments. I thank you all for making it a success. But back to this painting. This is very, very different for the normal thing I would sort of paint, but it taught me a really big lesson, and that's something I want to speak to you about right at the very end of this video. So make sure you watch all the way through. There's also a little mini tutorial as well, something to do with liner brushes. So settle back, comfy chair, cup of tea, feet up, and watch me paint a spooky scene, complete with disappearing and reappearing witches.
So here's my canvas, 12 by 16, and I covered it with some black gesso. I've also made a start with this, some Bob Ross liquid clear oil paint. I'm going to use one of these old Bob Ross landscape brushes. You can tell it's the old one because it's got a little orange tip on the end of the handle. I use it from a small plastic container that's easy to store in the freezer to keep it fresh. I want to apply this very sparingly, just a very, very thin coat to the whole canvas. Top tip, don't put on too much, your painting will become too slippery. Now, let's look at my palette. Very limited this time, titanium white, mountain mix and some yellow ochre. I dry clean that old 1-inch brush and go straight into the mountain mix. I want to apply this to the canvas all over again. But just how much have I put on my canvas? Well, it's kind of hard to tell. I'll use my fingers and touch it in to the paint. And as you can see, well, I didn't quite get enough on there. In fact, those ones have got nothing on. That one, not enough. Let's be a little more generous with it. And once again, I test it. Now I got some colour. I thought it looked a bit too grey though, so I added a small amount of Prussian blue to the colour. I just brush mixed them together and added more down in the foreground. Again, I tested it to make sure I had a good strong colour. There, that's perfect. I'm going to divide my canvas into thirds. 2/3 for the background and maybe something more interesting in the lower third. And a little bit more to the right of centre. Now, I've changed to a nice new Bob Ross 1-inch landscape brush. I've gone into a small amount of titanium white, just a touch, and I want to create a bit of a glow in the sky. I use soft crisscross strokes here. Make sure you don't leave any heavy brush marks. This will become a focal point in my painting later on. I'll blend out the colour though, make sure I get a nice sort of fade to it. There. For my moonlit sky, I want to add some clouds. I've picked up a nice, clean, fresh fan brush and just a small touch of that titanium white, but not pure white. I wanted a little bit off-coloured. Now, lay the fan brush at an angle to the canvas and create little letters C's using the corner of the fan brush. Build them up in layers. Notice how many times I reload my fan brush to paint the clouds. Painting on a black gesso canvas is one of my favourites to do. You can use a very small amount of paint to get a lot of painting done. But don't forget, do save some of the dark. So, hands up, how many people guessed that I only loaded my brush once to do this entire background sky? That's it, just one little bit of paint did all of it. Now, back to my nice, fairly clean 1-inch brush for a bit of soft blending. Notice I do little swirls with the corner of the brush. I barely touch the canvas. The idea is just to soften the effect, but not to overblend it. Notice all the lovely little details I leave behind. Half the trick is not to do too much. but I do want to come back in and add a little bit of extra sort of shine and shimmer here and there. I'm going to have a little bit of moonlight just here, and I'll just pick out the edges of a few little clouds. Again, do a little, stand back, then do a little bit more. I'll do a little bit of extra blending on these with that nice 1-inch brush. Before you know it, you have a completed sky. I'm going to use that 1-inch brush to add some nice tree details to my painting. Take note, I pull my brush through that contaminated white paint and tap and really open the bristles up. I really want them to be nicely splayed apart, not clogged together. I hold my brush gently and just tap gently downwards, leaving an imprint of the bristles. Remember, this is a nighttime scene, so I really don't want these trees to be sort of too bright. I want almost all of them to be more shadowy. I also load my brush, but more so on the side now. I want to put in sort of the area under the trees, maybe a little bit of land. Again, brightest here on the left, directly under the moonlight. I keep telling you there's going to be some moonlight, but I haven't actually painted the moon yet. As my brush runs out of paint, I'll start working over towards the right, into the shadowy areas. To add some depth and distance to my painting, I'm going to add a few more little bushes here. This one can be a little brighter. I kept that little bit of shadow there just in case I wanted to add these. Time for the bravery test. I want to put a nice spooky house just here. I sort of use that tree in the background really more as a marker. I start out by marking the centre line of the middle section. Notice how I use the angled knife just to sort of give me a shape for a roof. Now, this little painting is all about fantasy and fun. Nothing has to be straight or level. I'll give this a nice curve at the top. Maybe I'll curve it in from the other side as well. I also think there should be a couple more additions to it. Again, this is just a fantasy picture, so it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. I'm going to use my palette knife to pick up a very small roll of that contaminated white paint. Again, think about the direction of the moonlight. I think a little brighter on this side of the roof. Maybe a bit more shadow on the right hand side. Notice how I get the paint to break as I come down the face of the building. Just touch and gently pull down. Where have we practiced that before? Have a think about it. I'm going to add a little bit more detail here. I want this to look like maybe old boards, so I've picked up a little bit of that Prussian blue and mountain mix. Just touch with it here and there. No big detail here. Remember, this is moonlight, so you're not going to see all the little details, but I do want to add a little extra shadow line here. Notice how that really pushes the roof away from the sides of the building. I use the short edge of my palette knife just to tease down some of the extra colour. I think we're off to a good start with this little spooky house, but I think it needs a couple of windows. I'll use the short edge of my palette knife just to scrape away some of that paint. I dot them about in a random fashion. Maybe one here and one there. I'll add a doorway later. Time to mix up a little bit of candlelight. In this case, titanium white and a touch of the yellow ochre. I just want a sort of a nice glow to put into the various windows. I take a tiny little bit on the corner of my palette knife and with very gentle pressure just touch and go. It doesn't have to be perfect, just looking for a little touch of light. I'll come back and play with those a little later on. Now for that doorway. Same as before, just scrape out where you want it to be, and then I put in a little bit of light. I think someone's left the door open. I wonder who could be sitting there. I'll just have to stay and see who it is. Now let's add a little bit more detail to the base of this little building. I use the corner of my 1-inch brush and I angle it over. For smaller bushes I tip it on its side. For bigger bushes I stand it more upright. My painting looks a bit right hand heavy, so I'll have to do something about that in a moment. Time for a mini tutorial. This time I want to look at liner brushes. Some people struggle to make them work well, but notice that I always seem to be able to get a nice fine line from mine. I soak them in a little bit of linseed oil before I want to use them. This gives the bristles a chance to soften and hold paint a little better. There you go, mini tutorial over. I've added a couple of extra drops of linseed oil to my mountain mix, and I roll the brush on its side in the paint. Hold the brush well back down the handle, and here you see how a nicely soaked brush really works well. I turned the exposure up so you could see what I was doing. It was a bit too dark to see the detail. My softened brush holds enough paint to do the entire tree almost. That's how Bob managed to get his ones to work so well. Now, time to use this funny looking thing. If you don't know what it is, it's called a marl stick. This is a homemade one that I can use to hook over the edge of a wet canvas. It gives me somewhere to rest my hand when I'm painting fine detail. Most marl sticks just have a round ball on the end which you lean against the canvas, which isn't, well, terribly useful for a wet canvas. So I make my own. But they're not too hard to make. My first one was made with an old wire coat hanger, which I taped to a garden cane. It served me well for quite some time, but eventually I upgraded to, well, a more custom version. Basically, a piece of old wood I had laying in the shed. I've had a nice little witchy hat to the top of the roof, and now maybe just a few bats hanging there, catching 40 winks. I had a couple of little cobwebs in the corners too, really to add to that spookiness. I pulled out this little brush from my kit of others, and I want to use it to make up a nice sort of golden colour for my windows. If you don't have this small brush, you could use a liner brush as well, but this is what I had to hand. The colour I made was a nice sort of carroty orange colour, bright red and some Indian yellow. I just want to add a bit of extra glow to these windows. No big detail though, just blend them in. As you see, my windows look a bit, well, nice and neat and straight, and I really don't think they lend quite the right sort of character. I'm afraid that's me being a bit sort of engineering minded, so let's give them a little bit more of a shape. I'll bend the frames a little bit here and there, give them a bit more sort of, well, spookiness. For some fine details, I use the edge of my palette knife with a little bit of that mountain mix on it. Just a tiny touch. You just need to rest it against the canvas. Press firmly, slide it along, and then just lift off gently. There you have it. Super fine detail, but don't tell anybody how we did it. It's our secret. To draw the eye more to the left of the painting, let's add some more detail. Against those light background trees, I add some black ones, and against the shadowy area, I add some grey ones. Just using the opposite colour to make it show up. It's a simple trick, and it works really well. But I think I want to add something else to my painting. Yes, I think some of this light would be reflecting on the ground. Now, this is where I went, well, maybe a little bit wrong, because it suddenly looks like my house is sitting in front of some water. But I think it was just some puddles reflecting the light back. That's my excuse, and I'm sticking to it. I want to add a little more brightness to this foreground area, so I touch my nice 1-inch brush into some more of that slightly lighter white colour. Still a bit contaminated, so not perfectly white still. In fact, I don't use pure white anywhere on my painting, surprisingly enough. Now to draw the eye to the left a little more, I've included some nice little bushes. Maybe I'll add a few little posts there as well. There. And of course, my liner brush is working really well because I used some of that linseed oil on it, and so I can draw out these lovely fine wires. Time for another bravery test. I'm going to use my finger and some of this off-white paint. I'm going to put the moon in my painting. It's going to be roughly here. Top tip, start with just a small circle, maybe half an inch or so in diameter, and slowly grow it. Stand back occasionally. Now I'm going to soften the edge of this moon with my finger, so I wiped it on a piece of paper towel and I just go around the outside, create a nice sort of halo effect. Now, did you see my little witch was hiding on the canvas all along? That's right. Those of you with quick eyes would have spotted there was something stuck to my canvas. And there she is, my little witch. Let's give her a broomstick. I used the same technique as I did for putting the bars on the windows. I think my broomstick needs a little bit more attention. Let's give it the besom end, which is where all the little twigs are. And I think we'll add a few more details as well. I'm using some of my off-white colour to add a little bit more detail to my little witch's outfit. Nothing too bright here. I just want an idea of some detail in the silhouette. If you hadn't guessed it, I actually cut out a little sticky back plastic image and stuck it onto the black gesso canvas before I started the painting. So when I peel it off, there she is, the perfect little silhouette. I'll add a few more touches of detail to the cloak and maybe some extra hair detail, things that I couldn't cut out on that little sticky back plastic. I think I'll also add a couple of little feet. Maybe she's got her little boots on and they're just dangling out from beneath her dress. This is a very interesting little technique and one that I've used before, and it's fun to do when you're trying to just get a bit of extra detail into a painting. Like this little detail. I'm going to freehand paint a cat or a witch's familiar. Just two little ovals, a sweet little tail and maybe two tiny little ears is all it takes. Again, just a little silhouette. I think I'll make him just a little rounder here. And being a witch's familiar, he doesn't have a shadow. Now, for some final details, I'm going to add just a few little pats, but not that one. I didn't like it. I rubbed it out. I'll paint some more. There. I think that's the final detail.
So there's my little Halloween painting all finished up. But what did I learn from this painting? Well, sometimes it's good just to paint something, anything, for fun. It doesn't necessarily have to be a masterpiece. It doesn't even have to be perfect in any sense. It's always good practice. I love painting my sky, the trees. I broke paint on the side of my little house here. I learnt so much from it. I learnt what Bob would call the joy of painting. I see it in my own work, and I hope you will see it in your work too. Now, there's another lovely painting to watch coming along next. Happy painting, people.